大家早安。
Good morning to everyone.
那我们继续跟大家来分享这个以色列对他众子的预言。
We will continue to share on the topic Israel's prophecies concerning his son.
当我们在学习这个主题，最主要是带我们去思考过去的带我们去思考说一个人的个性、一个人的行动，还有他的态度会影响到他的一生。
So while we're studying this topic, it is for us to ponder and think about how a person's action and his decisions can affect his whole life.
比如说你看到这个流便，他本来是长子。
For example, we've studied Reuben, who was the firstborn.
但是他并没有去约束他的情欲，所以到后来他失去长子名分。
However, he was not able to restrain his own lust, and so he lost the birthright of the firstborn.
还有这个西缅跟利未他们的这种个性这种强烈的欲望之下所做的选择的这种个性影响到他们的一生。
And we also studied about how Simeon and Levi, their personality and their rash decision also affected and impacted the rest of their lives.
那你也可以看到犹大他是原本是坦白讲没有什么值得让人家称赞的，原本是这样子
And we can also see that originally Judah was someone who really did not have much for people to praise him about.
但是当他学会怎么样看到自己的不义
However, once he learned how to see his own unrighteousness,
当他学习怎么样去承担他兄弟的责任
once he learned how to take the responsibility for his brothers,
你就看到他后来所得到的祝福
we can see later on the blessings he received.
昨天我们把这个犹大的部分讲完了
So last night we finished on studying Judah.
那我们先来看一下创世纪49章。
So now let us refer to Genesis chapter 49.
13节跟14节13节14节
Verse 13 and 14.
对不起13节到15节
Beg your pardon. Verse 13 to 15. Genesis chapter 49, verse 13. Zebulun shall settle at the shore of the sea. He shall be a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Verse 14. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between the sheepfolds. 15. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to the burden, and became a slave at forced labor.
以撒家是利亚的第5个儿子
Issachar was the 5th son of Leah.
然后西布伦是利亚的第6个儿子
And Zebulun was Leah's 6th son.
那所以按理讲我们比较不能够理解说为什么在这个地方以色列会把这个西布伦先放在前面。
So by reason we are unable to understand why Israel here placed Zebulun before his older brother Issachar.
当然真实的理由我们不是很清楚
So we do not know the real reason why this happened.
但是如果看到他们所祝福的话，大概可以猜到一些原因啦
But if we read from the blessing and the prophecies spoken by Israel, we can deduce a few reasons.
我们先看西布伦
Let's take a look at Zebulun.
那西布伦它的意思就是居住的意思，它那个字根的意思就是那个查巴那个这个字是居住的意思
So the name Zebulun means to dwell.
就是说当利亚他生到第6儿子的时候，他觉得他会跟他的先生同住所以他取这个名字
So when Leah had her 6th son Zebulun, she felt that now her husband will dwell with her, so she named him Zebulun.
那其实他本来就跟他先生同住啦，他为什么会取这样名字
The truth was she was already dwelling with her husband, so why did she give her son this name?
所以我们上次在讲利亚的时候，我们就看到说，其实他已经看到了未来了
So when we discussed about Leah's faith last time, we already mentioned that Leah was looking forward to the future.
他后来是跟着他的先生被埋葬到祖坟，一起在等候呢应许的到来
Because eventually, at the end, she was the one that was buried with her husband in the tomb together with their ancestors to wait for the coming of the Lord.
所以这个所谓的居住这个西布伦这个名字是从这边来的
So the word to dwell is about means it comes from there.
好，那现在雅各对西布伦的祝福是说，西布伦必住在海口。
So now, Israel's prophecy and blessing for Zebulun is that he shall settle at the shore of the sea.
因为这个刚好这个住就是他的名字的意思，他居住在海口，他这样讲哈。
So to settle or to dwell, this is the meaning of his name.
如果你若看这个以色列的地图，其实它的西边都是在逼你那个地中海嘛哈。
So if we look at the map of Israel, we can see that the western border of Israel borders the Mediterranean Sea.
但是能够成为港口的其实不是很多哈。
However, there were not many spots that were considered a port or the port.
如果你去看它，比如说在那个Tel Aviv哈，那这个地方很多都是那个沙滩，所以很多人去那边晒太阳哈。
Now, if we look at just Tel Aviv, we can see that along the coast, it's all just shore and beaches, so people like to go there to suntan.
那它在南边有一个地方叫约帕，那个就是一个港口哈。
And so a bit south of there we see Joppa, and that is a port or a safe haven.
那其实所以说能够成为港口的城市并不是很多。
So even though there's a long shoreline, but there's not many cities along that shoreline that could become a port.
那第二个让人家很难理解，就是说，如果你去看约书亚记后来那个西布伦他的所分布的地图，所分布的地方哈。
The other thing we sometimes had to come to understand is if we read the book of Joshua and we see the land allocated to Zebulun.
它其实是在它并没有靠海，它是在内陆了。
You will see that actually, in fact, the land allotted to him was not along the coast, but rather more inland.
哇，那这样的话，是不是代表说雅各的预言变成不是很准确呢？
So does that mean then that Jacob's prophecy was not very accurate?
好，那这边我们稍微解释一下。
So here I'd like to make a few clarifications.
有两个原因，可能有两个因素。
There could be two factors.
好，我们看一下历代志上的第12章。
Let us read 1 Chronicles chapter
12章。
Chapter 12.
33节。
Verse 33. First Chronicles chapter 12, verse 33. Of Zebulun, 50,000 seasoned troops equipped for battle with all the weapons of war to help David with singleness of purpose.
如果你看这个大卫的这个军队其实西布伦支派是一个很强的军队。
If we look at David's army, we will find that the army that from Zebulun was one of the strongest.
而且人数很多人数很多。
And if you just look at the sheer number, their army was largest. Was very large.
而且他们非常的同心
And they were very united.
所以有人就说他们可能就是因为这个缘故就占了他的兄弟亚瑟的这个港口，有人是这样讲。
So some people say this could have been the reason why he took over the port that was in the land allocated to his brother Asher.
那就是说亚瑟其实他的北边本来是一些是这个我们讲的腓尼基的这些土地，他把就这个西布伦去占了，所以他就有海口。
So the land of the Phoenicians up north is where Asher's land was allotted, but because Zebulun was stronger with his army, so Zebulun took over the port cities there.
所以你刚刚回想到这个，如果我们刚才回想到刚刚那个雅各的祝福
So if we think back to Jacob's blessings.
13节说他的境界必延到西顿嘛
Verse 13 says his borders shall be at Sidon.
就是说没有错，这个雅各跟你说到海口是你要去打仗来的，你不是说天上掉下来的。
It's true, Jacob had prophesied that he would have the port cities. However, that this blessing will not just drop down and be given to you, like fall from the sky and be given to you. You have to fight for it.
好，这个情况就好像，比如说约书亚他在带军队到的这个打迦南地，譬如说这件事情来说。
So this is similar to the event where Joshua led the people to battle in the land of Canaan.
他们第二个城市叫做爱城嘛，
The second city they encountered was the city of Ai.
第一次失败了
The first time they lost.
那第二次呢，神就说好，我要把爱城交在你手中
The second time, God said that I will hand the city of Ai over to you.
那你注意看这个约书亚并没有说既然神这样讲，我就派老人派小孩到前面去打仗。
However, Joshua did not think, God's given city of Ai into our hands, so I'll just send the elderly and the children to take over this city.
他还是很仔细的去想要怎么样来打这个爱城
Joshua still thought very carefully about how to attack the city of Ai.
都在打仗当中假装失败，那所以他的城里面的那个爱城的城军队跑出来去追嘛
So he came up with a strategy to where he would pretend that his troops have lost, and so the troops inside the city of Ai will come out to follow.
然后这个埋伏的人就进到这个爱城里面，然后变成两边夹杀这样
Then they would have an ambush against the city, behind the city, and then they will come from both sides.
那这个是你可以理解说，对，神告诉你说这个交给你，不代表说你躺在床上就可以得到了
So this tells us that even if God has said, I will give this to you, does not mean you can just lie in bed and wait for it to fall out of the sky for you.
那我们信耶稣也是一样好了，那我们说信而受洗必然得救，这句话其实是对的
It's same when we believe in Jesus, and we know that those who believe and be baptized will be saved.
那你不能说我今天洗礼我得救了不用担心，我就一定进到天堂，躺着都可以进到天堂去
But that does not mean once we are baptized, we are completely saved and we just lie in bed and say, yep, we don't need to do anything else.
圣经说这个天国是奴隶人进去的嘛
Because the Bible says that we need to struggle and strive to get into heaven.
所以比如说我们要努力灵修不要被名字不要被涂抹掉我们尽量我们就是努力做这样子的事情
So we know that we must diligently do our spiritual nurture and cultivate ourselves so that we can enter into heaven.
好，所以第一个理由就是说，虽然他们这个西部人是在内陆，但是他们因为军队的强盛，曾经在大卫时期打到这个西顿就是亚瑟的北边拿到那个海口，这是第一种解释
So one way we can explain this prophecy is even though the land allocated to Zebulun was more inland, however, because Zebulun's army was stronger, so he was able to attack and fight and take over the northern region in the Sidonian region.
那第二个是用属灵的角度来看的
The second explanation, we can see it from a spiritual perspective.
其实在历史当中，西顿很少成为以色列的领土，很少
Historically, Zebulun very rarely took the land.
对，比如说所罗门是最强盛的，西顿还不是属于以色列的还是属于这个腓尼基王朝的。
For example, even during Solomon's time, when the nation was at its strongest, the land of the Sidonians and the Phoenicians still did not belong to Solomon. It would still belong to the Phoenicians.
但是呢，如果我们用属灵角度来看
But if we look at it from the spiritual perspective,
我们请看一下以赛亚书
let us read the book of Isaiah.
9章
Isaiah chapter 9.
第9章的第1节跟第2节。
Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1 and 2. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. But there will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. Verse 2. The people who walk in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined.
其实以赛亚已经开始预言了
So from Isaiah's time, there was already this prophecy.
西布伦跟这个拿弗他利他们地是被他藐视，就是代表边缘地带没有人看中。
So the land of Zebulun and Naphtali was a land that nobody paid attention on and was despised.
但是后来却被人家注意，被人家发现。
However, later on, people started paying attention to it, and it was discovered.
而且这个外邦人哇，那个在这个加利利得到荣耀
And the Gentiles, they were glorified they received glory in their land, in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali.
那第二节就解释因为在黑暗当中的走的百姓看见了大光。
So verse 2 explains it's because the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light.
那这个是指什么呢？
What does this refer to?
哇，那个你在想到，如果是你当时是以赛亚那个时期的人
If you put yourself as the people in the time of Isaiah,
你想这个荒凉的地方会有大光有吗？怎么这个不太可能
if you were living in the time of Isaiah, you would be thinking, in this desolate waste place, how can there be a great light?
我们来看一下马太福音
Let us read the book of Matthew.
马太福音第4章
Matthew chapter 4,
第15、16节。
verse 15 and 16. Matthew chapter 4, verse 15 and 16. The land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, by the road of the sea, on the road by the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region in the shadow of death, light has dawned.
再看一下14节
Let's also read verse 14. Verse 14. So that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled.
好，再看17节。
And also let us read verse 17. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near.
好，原来这件事情就是指马太就讲说原来是指主耶稣传道这件事情。
So from the Gospel of Matthew, we can see that this prophecy was concerning Jesus preaching.
哇，天国近了，你们要悔改。
Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
所以你看这个光就照在这个拿伯他利西布伦地那边。
So now a great light shines on the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali.
而且这个范围不是只有在以色列里，也甚至到这个外邦就我们讲西顿，以西顿作为一个代表，就是到了外邦的地方。
And this light did not just shine on the land in Israel, but they used Sidon as a representative that the light shine on the Gentiles.
我个人是想说，可能西布伦这个人这个人的个性比较积极。
So I personally feel perhaps Zebulun, it was in his personality to strive harder and to be more proactive.
你如果待会跟那个以撒迦，你看你就知道我在讲什么。
If we compare it later on to when we study about Issachar, we will understand what I'm trying to say.
这两个这个这个雅各第5子跟第6子，他们两个可能年纪蛮近的，所以他们俩可能年纪可能常常在一起吧，我在猜。
So Jacob's 5th son and 6th son, I believe my guess is that they are quite close and similar in age, so they hang out together quite often.
那他们两个个性刚好是相反的。
However, their personality was the exact opposite.
那西布伦是比较积极的。
Zebulun was more proactive.
利未跟西缅他们两个个性很相同，哇，两个常常在一起。然后后来之前我们就讲过，我就不再说了啦。
We know that Simeon and Levi, they have very similar personalities, we discussed this.
那这种积极的个性不是只有用在这个属世的层面上。
But this proactive personality was not just used in our material life.
在大卫时期，那他们可能曾经这个战争打到西顿，可能是这样子。
In the time of David, their battle and warfare might have taken them all the way up to Sidon.
但是呢，过没多久，你这个国势强弱了，还是国势衰落，还是被人家拿去了。
However, after a while, if your nation falls slightly, then of course your land will be taken back.
世上的东西是这样，你是得到了一阵子，你有失去了。
So this is the fact of life. You might gain something for a little while, but later you might lose it.
可能你买了一间房子，可能过了段子这个你又卖掉这个房子。
Perhaps you bought this house, and then later on you will sell this house.
可能你今天得到一个很好的工作，没多久，你这个工作失去了。
Or perhaps you were able to get a very good job for a little while, but later on you lost this job.
健康也是一样。
It is the same with our health.
在事实上，你没有说你得到什么东西是永远得到，没有这回事的。
In this world, when you gain something, there is no such thing as keeping this forever.
如果西部人他用他的军队，用他的武力得到了西顿假设了。
If, for example, if Zebulun was able to obtain the city of Sidon through his military powers.
但是那个价值存的不会太久。
But the value would not last very long.
但是当这件事情，这个你看到的属灵层面的时候，哦，它就是永恒的价值。
But if you look at from a spiritual perspective, it will have an eternal value.
所以你看到哦，主耶稣在这边，在这个这个西布伦这个地附近传道就是我们后来讲的这个北边加利利湖附近那你看这个所得到的造就，不只是当时的犹太人，包括外邦人。
So if you look at when Jesus preached in the land of Zebulun and Naphtali, this is in the region near the Lake of Galilee, and so when this light shined upon the land, it not only benefited the Israelites in that area, but it also brought light to the Gentiles in Sidon.
所以这时候我们再回到这个西部人的这个意思就是这个居住的意思。
So then if we return to the meaning of the name Zebulun, to dwell or to settle.
当我们学会跟主耶稣同行同住的时候呢，你就可以把你丰盛的生命影响到其他的人。
When we have learned to walk with Jesus and to dwell with Jesus, then we will be able to expand our light and the blessing to all the people around us.
就像这个西布伦，他的地可以延伸到这个西顿一样，延到了海口一样。
Just like how Zebulun was able to extend his land to the port, to the shore, and to Sidon.
好，那我们再看回来这个创世纪的49章。
And now let us turn back to Genesis chapter 49.
刚刚我们在讲他第5个儿子叫做以撒迦。
We have also mentioned Jacob's fifth son, Isaac.
那这个以撒迦，这个雅各形容他说他是一个强壮的驴啦。
Now, Isaac was described by Jacob as a strong donkey.
那我们知道这个以撒迦的意思就是有价值的意思。
And we know that Isaac's name means value or higher.
因为当时这个利亚是用一个风茄跟他的妹妹换得来的啦。
Because at that time, at that time, Rachel swapped. There's something Leah was able to exchange with Rachel through mandrakes.
对，那因为这个风茄是流便拿到的嘛
Because the mandrakes belonged to Reuben.
那本来这个拉姐要把它抢过去，那时候利亚就很不高兴，说：“哇，你已经得到先生的爱，为什么还要跟我抢这个东西？”
Rachel wanted the mandrakes, but Leah was unhappy because Leah thought Rachel already had the love of their husband, so why did she want to take this from her as well?
所以他就用这个风茄就换得这个雅各，他应该要属于利亚的这样子。
So with the mandrake, Leah exchanged with Rachel for a night with their husband.
然后在那个晚上，他就夫妻同房，然后就怀孕，就生了这个以撒迦。
And that night she conceived and she gave birth to Isaac.
所以这个名字有价值，说他是用这个有价的东西换来的。这个是当时利亚的意思。
So the name Isaac means of value or something she exchanged for hire.
那你注意看到这个以撒迦的地理位置，其实如果以现在角度来讲，等于是可以是说这个目前以色列当中相当丰盛的一个地方了。
So if we look at the land allotted to Isaac, we can see that geographically it's a spot where currently it's a very prosperous land.
他们有很多，因为它这个大概有横跨一部分的耶斯列平原然后横跨这个北边的一个高山到了加利利，所以那个地方坦白讲，现在都是非常很丰富的地方。
So because the land allotted to Isaac included the plain of Jezreel and up north to the mountains, and so currently, if we look at Israel at the moment, this is a very prosperous land.
那这一说这个强壮的驴，代表说哇，这个驴是自己说驴一般的在当时来讲都是很载重啦，或是在这边推磨都是用这个驴来做的。
So at that time, the strong donkeys were used in that time for to help plant in the land or to help grind.
比如说我们之前讲的这个，你要去推那个这个橄榄油的时候，有时候用驴子去磨这个橄榄油，磨橄榄油
Previously, when we discussed about olives, when they use the mill to grind the olive to press for the oil, they sometimes would use donkeys to help them.
那会用驴子不用马，原因除了这个驴子的力量大它走路比较慢，但是力量大。第二个是它的性情非常的比较温和。
The reason why donkeys are used instead of horses, apart from the fact that donkeys are a little bit slower in their walk and they have more strength, it's also because the donkeys have a more gentler personality.
所以你注意看，这过去的君王他们在进到自己的城市的时候，自己的城门都是用驴子或是骡子这样
So we can see that in ancient times, when the kings enter into their cities, they would often ride mules or donkeys.
如果你是骑着马那个是有代表说我是战胜的，就是那个是骑到对方的敌国的城打下来之后，我才骑马进去的。
Whenever the king would ride a donkey to enter into a city, that would usually mean he's coming from a battle and he has won and has conquered the city.
好，我们请看一下这个约翰福音。
Let us read Gospel of John.
福音的第12章。
John chapter 12.
第14节。
Verse 14. John chapter 12, verse 14. Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written.
第15节。
Verse 15. Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt.
16节。
16. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered these things had been written of him and had been done to him.
当然这段是根据这个这个撒迦利亚书那边的预言而来的啦。
So this passage was based on the prophecy written in book of Zephaniah.
那是一个和平的君然后骑着驴子进到这耶路撒冷去。
It described the Prince of Peace riding a colt into the city.
所以主耶稣并没有走路进去主耶稣是骑着驴子这样进到耶路撒冷进去。
So Jesus did not walk into the city of Jerusalem. He was riding on a donkey.
所以我们对驴子的感觉要站在圣经来讲，它是一个温和，它是一个能够吃苦的一个动物了。
So our understanding of the donkey from a biblical perspective is that it has a more gentler disposition and it is an animal that is able to do labor.
所以基本上讲，当雅各说他儿子像这以撒家像这个强壮的驴，不是在骂他了应该是一种正面的来看待这个小孩。
So here, when Jacob described his son as a strong donkey, this is not a derogatory term, but more looking at him with a positive reinforcement.
但是他看到一个问题，就是说这个小孩虽然是强壮的驴，意思说他其实很有潜力的
So there was a slight issue, even though Issachar is a strong donkey, so it means he had potential.
他应该是去劳动的
That he should be doing labor.
应该是多做一些事情的。
And he should be doing a lot more work.
你看这个创世纪第14章对不对？49章第14节
So if we read Genesis chapter 49, verse 14,
他说卧在羊圈之中
describes him as lying down between the sheepfolds.
后面15节说他以安静为家，以肥地为美。
Verse 15, he saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant.
所以意思说你本来应该是劳动的，结果你现在整天都窝在这个很好的地方，然后什么都不动就是一个驴子躺卧在这个应该是羊躺卧在羊圈嘛，就他是驴子躺卧在羊圈这样。
So if you're a donkey and you're strong, you should be doing manual labor and to do some work. However, Issachar was lying in the sheepfolds where sheep should be lying in.
当然我们基督徒要追求一个安静平和的个性，这是需要的
It is true, as Christians, we should pursue for a peaceful and restful personality.
但不代表说你什么事都不要做
But that does not mean that we just sit and do nothing.
这个就是让我想起这个亚伦
So this actually reminded me of Aaron.
可以想到亚伦他应该是个性跟相对摩西他是比较温和的
Compared to Moses, Aaron's personality was also more on the gentler side.
但是你注意看这个民数记20章
But if we read Numbers chapter 20,
民数记20章的时候呢，就发生了这个加底斯的事件
in Numbers chapter 20, the incident in Kadesh happened.
这个是已经在他们出埃及之后大概30多年、38年、37年所发生的事情。
So this is something that happened 38 or 37, 38 years after they left the land of Egypt.
然后这个摩西呢，神就叫摩西吩咐水出来，但是摩西用杖去击打。
And this incident was where the Lord told Moses to command the rock to yield water. However, Moses struck the rock.
那后来神对亚伦也不高兴哦。
But later on we see that God was also unhappy with Aaron.
我们看20章的24节。
Let us read chapter 20, verse 24. Chapter 20, verse 24. Let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land that I have given to the Israelites, because you rebelled against my command at the waters of Meribah.
当你看到这段的时候，你觉得跟亚伦什么关系啊
？When you read this, you might think, what did this incident have to do with Aaron?
在击打磐石是摩西啊，亚伦也没有讲话在旁边呢。
It was Moses who struck the rock. Aaron didn't even say anything.
所以这可能就是神责备亚伦的地方了。
This is probably where God rebuked Aaron.
看到亚伦曾经做一件得罪神的事情，就是说允许百姓造金牛犊嘛，对不对？
Because we know that in the past, Aaron had allowed the people to build the golden calves, and that angered the Lord.
他还跟他姐姐然后毁谤摩西，这也是他发生不好的事情。
And also, him and his sister Miriam, they blasphemed and they slandered Moses.
但是神都没有责备，这件事情神并没有责怪他哦，责怪亚伦哦。
But on these things, God didn't rebuke Aaron.
但其实因为那是刚出埃及所发生的事件，神也允许亚伦去在这个慢慢去学习嘛哈。
And we know that all these things, all the mistakes he did just then, we mentioned, it happened just after they had left the land of Egypt. So perhaps God was allowing Aaron to slowly learn.
那这件事情已经发生在这个即将要进入迦南地之前没有多久。
However, this incident at Kadesh, it happened just before they were about to enter into the land of Canaan.
所以他们的灵性啊，神对他们要求都比过去高很多。
So God's expectation of them at this point, especially of their spiritual nature, was a lot higher.
你看亚伦只是没有讲话而已哦，没有去劝阻他的弟弟哦，你看神就开始不高兴了。
So here, Aaron did not encourage his brother and did not stand up and speak and stop his brother. And because of this, the Lord was angry.
所以有时候我们也像那个以撒迦一样，或像亚伦一样，就说好了，我一个很好的个性，安静，然后我不要跟人家相争。这个看起来好像不错了。
So sometimes we might be a bit like Issachar. We have a good personality, we are peaceful, and we don't argue or we don't have any arguments and fights with other people.
但是我们不能说整天躺在羊圈当中，就慢慢就懒散起来了。
But that does not mean that we can lie all day in the sheepfold and become lazy.
好，那这个就是这个我们讲所谓的以撒迦的问题啦。
And so this is what we consider Issachar's problem.
所以我们再看回来刚刚那个创世纪第49章哈。
So if we return back to Genesis chapter 49.
15节下半段说，它就变成你好逸恶劳久之后，就反而自己变成奴隶了。
So we see that in the end, the things turned and changed on him, and he became slave at forced labor.
那既然你成为奴隶，就失去了价值了嘛。
If you become a slave, then you've lost your value.
本来是有价值的人，是变得没有价值的。
Originally, he was a person of value, but then he eventually became someone of no value.
变成一个服苦的人啦，服苦的奴隶啦，这样啊。
He became a slave at forced labor.
那所以我们来思考有关这个所谓的这个懒惰哈，在这个箴言有谈到这个懒惰的人，很多这种主题哈。
We know when we think about laziness, we know that the book of Proverbs shared a lot of verses on this theme.
什么叫做懒惰人哈？
What is a lazy person?
就是对任何的行动都很缓慢。
It means you are very slow when you are doing anything.
那也不愿意被训练，也不愿意主动进取。
You are not willing to be trained, nor are you willing to advance.
就简单讲是不愿意吃苦啦，简单这么说了哈。
Simply put, it's a person who does not want to go through hardship.
就好像这个以撒家，哇，在这个很丰富的这个草场哈，哇，他结果这个肥地为美，哇，结果他就失去了那个他原来这个这个驴子的那个本性，要劳动那个本性。
So it's just like Issachar. There's all these green pastures. So he ends up lying down, resting in the land that was really pleasant, and lost his original goal, which is to work.
好，我们看一下那个箴言20章。
Let us read Proverbs chapter 20.
箴言第20章
Proverbs chapter 20,
4节。
verse 4. Verse 4. The lazy person does not plow in season. Harvest comes and there is nothing to be found.
这边说这冬天很寒冷哦，不要去耕种，哇，夏天就没有得收成嘛。
So here it says in winter it's so cold that they refuse to plow. Therefore, when harvest comes, there's nothing to harvest.
好，我们再看一下第15章
Let us also read chapter 15,
第19节。
verse 19. Chapter 15, verse 19. The way of the lazy is overgrown with thorns, but the path of the upright is a level highway.
这个经常说你这个懒惰人道好像那个荆棘的篱笆，意思是说哇，这个阻挡很多啦，意思是这样啦。
The way of the lazy is overgrown with thorns means that there's a lot of obstacles in their way.
那让正直人的道就是平坦的大道。
But the path of the upright is a level highway.
好，我们再看一下第13章
Let us also read chapter 13,
第4节。
verse 4. Chapter 13, verse 4. The appetite of the lazy craves and gets nothing, while the appetite of the diligent is richly supplied.
懒惰人羡慕但是呢没有所，他只有心在想，但是他没有行动了。
So the appetite of the lazy craves and gets nothing. It's because he thinks a lot with his head what he wants, but there is no action that follows.
所以到最后什么都没有得到。
And in the end, he gets nothing.
我记得有一次那时候我还在台湾的时候
I remember once, and this was still when I was back in Taiwan.
那我们有一次办这个学生灵恩会，
Once we held this student spiritual convocation.
我们请了一个弟兄他是在这个监狱里面做那个 counselor。
So we invited a brother to join us in our spiritual convocation, student spiritual convocation, and he was a counselor in the jail.
我们有给他安排2个课，两堂课让他讲课。
So we gave him 2 sessions to allow him to speak on the topic.
当然我们针对对象就是那些这些 high school 的学生嘛。
So that being a student spiritual convocation, his target audience were high school students.
那我们这个弟兄他所做那个 counselor 那个监狱的 counselor 是那种还没有成年就是还没有18岁以前就犯罪的这些人。
So this brother who was invited to speak, he was actually a counselor in more like a juvenile detention center.
然后因为那个还没有18岁，所以说跟一般的监狱不太一样
And because the people kept in these detention centers were under the age of 18, so the detention center worked a bit differently to a jail.
所以有给他们更多的训练，更多的这个教育等等这些事情。
So the kids in there were given a bit more education and training, etc.
那这个弟兄他讲了一句话，我到现在还有印象。
And this brother said something that I still remember today.
他说：“当你在年轻的时候，
He said, when you're young,
你总是在做你喜欢的事情；
you always do things that you like to do.
你年老的时候，你只能做你不喜欢的事情。”
If that is the case, then when you get old, you will only do things that you do not like to do.
当你在年轻的时候做你不喜欢的事情，
If you do what you do not want to do while you are young,
那在你的年老的时候才能够有这个时间做你喜欢的事情。
then when you get older, you will have time to do things that you enjoy.
我不知道那边的年轻人听得懂不懂
I'm not sure whether the youth that day understood this.
我可以简单讲，就是说在台湾有一种植物叫做甘蔗，这个什么那个这个 sugar cane 那个甘蔗。
In Taiwan, there is a special plant called sugarcane.
那这个甘蔗它在尾巴的地方比较甜。
Now, with the sugarcane, it's always the ends that are sweeter.
对不起，它的头比较甜，我讲错了，对不起，头比较甜哈。
So the head of the sugarcane, sorry, is sweeter.
如果是你先从头吃的话，哇，开始很甜哈。
So if you eat from that end, then you will taste the real sweetness.
那慢慢越吃哇，越不甜，越不甜，越来越不甜这样哈。
But then as you continue down the sugarcane and you eat the rest of it, you will find it gets less and less sweet.
所以说他们就有一句话叫倒吃甘蔗，就是说你先从不甜的部分吃。
So there is a saying to eat the sugarcane from the other end, which is to start from eating from the end that is not as sweet.
那慢慢的，你就就尝到那个甜味，越来越甜味。
Then slowly you will be able to feel this. You will be able to taste the sweetness more and more.
那我想这个就是一个生活的智慧啊。
I believe this is the kind of wisdom of living.
我们也期待这些年轻人他们在平常时候应该能够努力一些哈。
Because we also anticipate and hope that our youth will be able to work hard while they're young.
也包括在属灵的事情上面。
And this includes in their spiritual life as well.
我们再看一下这个生命记。
Let us also read Deuteronomy.
生命记当然也谈到说这个摩西对这个我们看33章哈。
Let us read Deuteronomy chapter 33.
第18节。
Verse 18. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 18. And of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents.
第19节。
Verse 19. They call peoples to the mountain. There they offer the right sacrifices, for they suck the affluence of the sea and the hidden treasures of the sand.
你看呢，摩西这样把这两个的支派把它连在一起哈。
Here again, even Moses, he put these two tribes together.
好，那这个西部人喜欢出外，然后以撒家喜欢在帐篷里面。
Here he describes Zebulun like he likes going out, whereas Issachar likes to stay in his tent.
没有关系，这是每个人个性不一样。
And that is fine because everyone has different personalities.
你不要期待每个人大家都像我们一样喜欢在帐篷，或者像我们一样喜欢到外面去。但神给每个人个性是不一样的。
And we shouldn't think that everyone should be like us to like going out, or to be like us to like to stay in our tent.
重点是你要怎么样在你的个性来当中得到神的祝福。
But what is important is how do we receive blessings from God within our personality.
19节就是说他们要将列邦招在山上，在那边献公义的祭。
Yeah, verse 19 says, they call people to the mountain, there they offer the right sacrifices.
那这句话我们在思考说，有可能跟这个加密山有关系。
Now, when we think about it, I think it's related to Mount Carmel.
我们请看一下这个弥迦书第7章。
Let us read Micah chapter 7.
弥迦书第7章。
Micah chapter 7.
第14节。
Verse 14.
弥迦书7章第14节。
Micah chapter 7, verse 14. Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock that belongs to you, which lives alone in a forest in the midst of a garden land. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead, as in the days of old.
所以我们刚才在根据那一段来讲，因为这个加密山是他们在他们的境内，在他们境内。
So, this is based on what we discussed. The Mount Carmel is within their allotted land.
应该是在西部人的这个的范围里面。
In the land allotted to Zebulun.
好，那加密这边谈到在加密山的树林后面说，用你的帐幕放你独居的名了。
So here it says to shepherd your flock which lives alone in the forest, this forest of Carmel.
那因为这个加密山接近这个地中海，所以它雨量很充沛。
So because Mount Carmel is situated close to the Mediterranean Sea, so it receives a lot of rainfall.
所以那个加密山下有个平原叫耶斯列平原，那个是一个非常等于是以色列的谷仓啦，谷仓非常生产很多的粮食。
And at the foot of Mount Carmel is the plain of Jezreel, and the plain of Jezreel is considered the grain house of the land of Israel because there are lots of crops and produce. That's where lots of crops and produce come out.
对，那这个在这个山坡上地上有很多的羊也在那边放牧，很多的羊。
And on the hills there, that's where many shepherds take their flock to pasture.
所以这个时候，这个弥迦就用这个概念谈到说，你要怎么样用杖去牧放你的独居的民。
So here, Prophet Micah used this concept to say how they can shepherd their flock with their staff.
好，那这样的话，我们再看回来这个摩西的祝福就更能够理解了哈。
So after understanding this, we can get a better understanding of Moses' blessing.
13章19节这么说哈。
Chapter 33, verse 19.
啊，你要在那边，在那个山上献公义的祭啊。
They call to the peoples to the mountain. There they offer the right sacrifices.
当然，就是我们讲这个祭，就是你自己要有所牺牲，但是公义的祭是你能够讨神的欢喜哈。
The right sacrifices means you must make sacrifices yourself, but it must be a sacrifice that is acceptable and pleasing to God.
做神所要求我们做的事情哈。
So we do things that God has asked us to do.
如果我们这样做，就能够像这个希布伦跟以撒迦一样，在海里面得到丰富，在沙中得到其中的宝藏啊。
So if we do this, then we will be like Zebulun and Issachar. They'll be able to suck the affluence of the sea and the hidden treasures of the sand.
那根据我们刚才所思考的连在一起，这个更指的这种属灵的这种价值啊。
So if we connect this to what we have been reading and discussing, then this brings out even more spiritual value.
好，所以我们都期待能够像这个摩西所祝福希布伦跟以撒迦的这样的祝福。
So we all want to obtain the blessing that Moses had given to Zebulun and Issachar.
无论你是内向的人，无论你是外向的人啊。
Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
重点是你要怎么样在神的山献公义的祭。
The point is how you will be able to make righteous sacrifices on the mountain of God.
这样的话就可以从海中、从沙中得到神所赐给我们的宝藏。
Because through this you will be able to gain the treasures God has for us, whether it's in the sea or of the sand.
好，那我们其他的部分我们下个礼拜一再来说哈。
As for the rest, we will continue to discuss this next Monday night.
我们现在一起来唱诗363首。
Now let us sing hymn 363.